Okay, so we started yesterday with trait theories of personality after finishing up humanistic and social cognitive behavioral, as well as psychodynamics. So we're ready to move on to this. And we mentioned yesterday that trait is a stable predisposition. In other words, it is stable across situations. In other words, if you're impatient, you'd be impatient in traffic, you'd be impatient waiting on a line at Starbucks. And it's also stable across time, meaning it's unlikely that that trait is going to change as you age. How do we know how many traits there are? Because if I asked you like what somebody's personality traits are yours, you might list like 10, somebody else might list another 12. And then when we start combining these lists, there could be like hundreds of traits. So in order to figure out what the basic traits are, just like we try to figure out what the basic components of intelligence are, or the basic emotions are, we did factor analysis. So factor analysis allows researchers to look at correlated clusters of behavior. So somebody who is outgoing and says, I like excitement and practical jokes, pretty much is the same thing as saying that you're extroverted. We looked and briefly looked at these early trait theories, and I had said you didn't have to memorize these, but you do have to become familiar with them. It's certainly, and these are important trait theorists in terms of how they differ in describing the types of traits that we have. So we started with Gordon Allport, and this is where we left off yesterday. With Gordon Allport, we said that there are traits that are central. They just make up your personality. They're present for most situations. So that's that stability across time and situation. But Gordon Allport did also acknowledge that sometimes traits appear only in specific situations. For example, anxiety or social anxiety may only happen or not social anxiety, sorry, anxiety about public speaking only happens in a social setting. You're not really anxious to speaking with people at a party, for example. And then there are those are called ordinal or secondary traits. And then those cardinal traits, very rare, but if you have them, it sort of defines who you are. Okay, examples we gave were Hitler, who's evil, or Mother Teresa, who exhibits kindness, or Machiavelli, who's ruthless. Raymond Cattell, actually, when he did the factor analysis, came up with 16 personality factors. That's what the PF stands for, 16 personality factors. And he basically, the factors were given both, like you're either on one side or the other. Like if on a warmth factor, you're either cold or you're supportive. On an intellect factor, you're either instinctive or you're cerebral. Emotional stability, moody or calm. And you don't have to memorize these 16, but you should acknowledge that Cattell did come up with these 16 different factors, and was just when we do personality tests, you might take one that gives you a rating on each of these factors. Hans Eysenck, and this is where I do want you to know these, that he did look at the two qualities of a personality as either being stable or unstable. That's one set to judge a personality trait by. And the other way to judge a personality trait is how extroverted, how outgoing you are, right? As well as how introverted you are. So you don't have to memorize sanguine, phlegmatic, melancholic, choleric, but you should know that he did measure all traits, doesn't matter what the trait was, on these two scales. The model that is often tested on the AP exam, and certainly one that we see frequently, is called the five-factor model. And Costa and McCrae were the two researchers who used factor analysis, and they basically said personality consists of 5 basic traits, and you sit somewhere on the scale of these traits. These are the traits you do need to know. So with the big 5 personality factors, one is called openness. And let me go back one. Hold on. We have openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And we actually use the acronym OCEAN to remember these. So Costa, McCrae, OCEAN. So we go through them in that order. So we start with openness. To be open just doesn't mean that you talk about yourself. Open means that you are open to new ideas, which means you are often original and creative, and you have so many, like a broad set of interests, and you're very receptive, like I said, to new ideas. So somebody says, hey, you want to go try this new restaurant, and even though you love another restaurant nearby, you think, yeah, sure, I haven't tried that. I'd be happy to try it. Okay. You maybe like to dabble in tennis, you'll play because it's kind of fun, it's interesting to you, but you really love to also go out and take a run, or you might enjoy golf. Okay, so you're just basically open to like a lot of different interests. Conscientiousness, I think you kind of maybe intuitively know what it means to be conscientious. It means that you're organized, you're responsible, you're dependable, right? Meaning reliable. Um, you are deliberate in how you behave, and you're really confident with what you do. So, conscientiousness is probably the most related to your schoolwork. Then you have extroversion, and extroverts are fun loving. So they enjoy a little practical joke. They're typically pretty warm people. They're open to other people. And so not openness, but open to relationships with other people because they like to bring people in. They like to make other people feel good because they feel good about themselves. They have a lot of positive emotions. So they're kind of this very outgoing and loving person. And then we have agreeableness. Agreeableness is how much you value harmony. Do you really need to, give your opinion about something that's a dissenting opinion, or are you pretty much somebody who will go along with the crowd? Are you also somebody who's accepting of others? So even though you might not agree with them, there's really no reason for you to argue with them because you accept their opinion and how they feel. And you trust that it comes from a good place. People who are agreeable are also cooperative and modest. And finally, we have neuroticism. So we had openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness. All these things seem to be pretty good to have. Then we get to neuroticism, which isn't maybe something you want to be high on this scale. Because people who are neurotic, and if you remember, we used neuroses in in Freud's theory, right? We have these anxieties, these neuroses, and that's exactly what neuroticism is. It's how anxious you are, how insecure, how hostile. Are you self-conscious? You feel like you're always on the stage? Are you vulnerable to other people's attacks on you, or at least seemingly attacks on you? Are you unstable in that emotionally you can swing from one place to another? So like we might say moody. Okay. So I'm going to go back and let you take, so if you didn't take notes on all these, let's go back again to openness. Maybe write down a couple of these. And rate yourself on a scale of, we'll just go with the scale of 1 to 5, not that it matters, but let's say 1 is low and 5 is high. Where do you fit on the openness scale? And remember, if you were given an FRQ, you would have to not just say, I'm open to new experiences. You'd have to say an example of my being highly open is that whenever I'm working in a group, I'm the one who comes up with the original way to solve the problem, a creative way to solve the problem. When we look at conscientiousness, if you were writing an FRQ and you were to say somebody is not, let's go with not conscientious, low on the conscientiousness scale, you might say that, again, we'll take a group situation. When we're working on a group project, they don't show up on time and they don't put in as much work as everybody else. And the work that they do isn't really even what you ask them to do. So that would be an example of low on the scale of, or like a 1 on the scale of conscientiousness. We might say these people often have low achievement motivation. Then big 5, an extroversion. And again, I'll go on the low end of the scale. Let's say that somebody is an introvert. An introvert might be somebody who keeps to themselves, that they're not somebody who necessarily seeks relationships with others. It's not that they're not friendly, but they don't exhibit that characteristic outwardly. Okay. So an example you might use on an FRQ is somebody who is an introvert. Maybe they're asked by some friends to go to a party that somebody from another school is throwing. And they're like, no, I don't think so. I don't really want to go. They're not that adventurous. I got my friends. I'm good with my friends. I don't really want to like go to a strange party and try to meet new people. Then we have agreeableness, somebody who is highly agreeable. Again, let's go with the group setting, like you're working on a school group project. They don't try to control what everybody is doing because they trust that others will do their job. And they're also the kind of people who would, when you're working in a group, might ask you about yourself. They're interested in you. Outside of the group setting, like, well, yeah, what are you doing like tonight? What's something you like to do usually? Where do you go? It's just kind of just being interested in everybody else. And finally, on neuroticism, somebody who is neurotic would be the kind of person who might be very anxious about getting their work done on time and other people getting their work done on time. They might be the person who contacts the teachers that I don't think anyone's doing the work and I'm afraid that I'm going to be the only one doing it and I'm going to get a bad grade. And because that's a little bit hostile to the rest of the group. And yet, when you work with them on a second group project, they seem to be okay. So because they're unstable, like sometimes their mood is anxiety and sometimes it's like okay, but they're just not predictable. So with trait theories, remember we talked about how you measure personality with psychodynamic theories. The way you would measure personality with psychodynamic theories is through, go look it up, it's in your notes packet. We talked about specific types, a category of tests. Okay, do you remember what it is? And these are Rorschach type tests and thematic apperception tests, which all fall under the umbrella of projective tests. You take your unconscious, you project it onto an ambiguous image. Trait theories don't rely on that. It's a lot simpler. With a trait theory, you can just give people a survey of like how would you act in this situation, or how do you rate yourself? And the two major personality inventories, they're called inventories because they're just simply inventories of how you view responding to questions. Personality inventories are always self-assessment. Okay, nobody has to deliver the test to you. It's not like a Rorschach test where somebody has to interpret it. But they're basically these self-assessment tools, and they basically determine the factors that make up your personality. The two ones that we study, and they differ greatly in terms of their uses, are the MMPI and the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is something, the Myers-Briggs is maybe something you've seen before. But the MMPI is used by psychologists. It's actually used in a diagnostic and clinical setting to diagnose psychological disorders, including personality disorders, like do you have a borderline personality disorder, or antisocial personality disorder, or conduct disorder. So they might ask questions like this: on a scale of 1 to 5, how strongly do you agree with the following statement? I often think people are following me. And there are a lot of questions. It's actually 500 questions. And in these inventories, they are designed to trick you. They might ask a question like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how strongly do you agree with the following statement? I never lie. I mean, everybody lies. I mean, with rare exception, everybody has lied in their life. So if you answer and you're trying to manipulate the outcome of the test and you answer, oh, I agree, I am 5, I strongly agree, I never lie, they're going to know that perhaps you're not being very forthcoming. So this is basically, the MMPI as a diagnostic tool. Okay? It would be given to people to diagnose depression, OCD, any other anxiety disorder, illness, including illness, anxiety disorder, personality disorders, etc. The Myers-Briggs type indicator is a little different. It measures your preferences, like how you like to deal with others and problems in the world, and then it delivers a type, a Myers-Briggs type, based on 4 indicators. So it's a 4-letter personality indicator, and there's really no good or bad. Like MMPI can be bad, right? You could have something like schizophrenia, but Myers-Briggs is not about good or bad. It's really your relationship style with the world. So I'd like you to let's take a look back at these 4 different theories. We have the psychodynamic theory, where the key contributors are Freud, Jung, Horney, and Adler. And Erikson, please add Erikson in here. I'm not sure why I left him off. The main ideas here are that there are some unconscious forces, according to Freud, sexual urges, according to Jung, collective unconscious and archetypes, and with Adler, inferiority complex, inferiority complex. And all of these come together to form your personality. So really your personality is coming out through all these things that are sitting in your unconscious that you're not really aware of, but they come out in your behaviors and your actions. And it's mostly anxieties. When we looked at behaviorism and the social cognitive theories that built on behaviorism, Skinner was a behaviorist. We didn't really mention him directly, but he was the person who would say that you are who you are simply as a product of punishments and reinforcements. But then we had Julian Rotter, who looked at self-efficacy and locus of control, and Albert Bandura, who looked at reciprocal determinism. But the main ideas here is that our environment definitely impacts who we are, as much as our expectancy of how we expect to be treated and what's happening in that situation, and what we learn from our environment, like right, our reinforcements and punishments. What did I learn from this? Did I learn? It doesn't have to be right me directly; it could be observational learning. But I just smiled at somebody; they didn't smile back at me. I just learned I'm probably not going to smile again. Okay. And then we have the humanists, Carl Rogers, and Abraham Maslow. Maslow did the pyramid, and Rogers was the clinician who talked about that unconditional positive regard. And the main ideas here are that humanists want you to be able to be in an environment where you can experience personal growth to achieve self-actualization. And they work on your self-concept so that your self-concept is positive. If you have a positive self-concept, you will behave in ways that are congruent with that positive self-concept. And then finally, today we looked at trait theorists, Allport, Ising, Cattell, Costa, and McRae. And the main ideas here are that traits are relatively stable. Everyone has a different pattern of traits, and factor analysis was used to identify basic traits. And again, don't be confused by the fact that Allport did have those secondary traits that only appeared in certain situations. It was still stable because those traits would appear always in that situation. So we're going to practice. So let's go ahead and do that before you move on and do some review on your own. Hannah loves to travel internationally, owns many unusual pieces of jewelry, and enjoys attending festivals that feature an eclectic collection of musicians. Eclectic meaning a wide variety. According to theorists, it should have said, Paul Costa and Robert McRae, Hannah's personality is likely high on what? Does she appear to be anxious to you? And if not, you can just cross out neuroticism. Is there anything about her reliability, dependability? And not so much, so we could cross that out. Okay. Is she extroverted? We really don't know anything about her relationships with other people because nothing about this mentions it. She might be, but we don't know. And agreeable. Is she agreeable? Does she appear to go along with the crowd? Again, don't really know, but the fact that she likes a wide variety of music would indicate that maybe she is like somebody who kind of, goes to her own beat here, which really leaves openness. And the answer is openness. She's open to new experiences. Okay. Then we have Leo. Leo thinks he will fail his driving test because he believes he is a poor driver, even though he has never had an accident or been told by his parents that he is terrible at driving. Which of the following explanations would the cognitive approach use to explain Leo's behavior? Well, we did not go specifically through a cognitive approach. Imagine, cognitive is how we think, it's how we appraise, okay? So it has to be something wrong with the way Leo's appraising the situation. So let's read through them. His irrational thoughts are causing him to doubt his abilities, even though he has evidence to show otherwise. Well, that sounds pretty good, right? Because it seems irrational to think you're going to fail when you've never been told that you're a bad driver and you've never had an accident. Okay. But we'll leave that aside. Let's look at the second one. He's not fully achieved self-actualization. That's definitely not a cognitive approach. That's a humanist approach. He has a conflict between his id, his ego, superego. Okay. Again, it's not cognitive. This is psychodynamic. And if you were taking a test, you'd be circling, whether virtually in your head or on a piece of paper, the words cognitive approach. He has been raised in a culture that promotes self-deprivation, so it keeps him from practicing. It doesn't appear that is correct because his parents certainly are not depriving him. And though it could, actually, there's nothing here that says anything about thinking, so this can't be the cognitive approach. And then it talks about using a defense mechanism, which is also psychodynamic, not cognitive, which leaves us with that first answer. Mina takes a test to develop an inventory of different aspects of her personality. She hopes to better understand herself and the kind of person she is. This test is most in line with, and again, a projective test is used by psychodynamic theorists like Rorschach. A behavioral theory of personality, well, they don't give out inventories. Humanistic don't give out inventories. The only one who gives out an inventory would be a trait theory of personality. And because, just to be clear, because she's taking this test to understand herself better, it cannot be the MMPI that is used by clinicians to diagnose disorders. It is likely something, not necessarily the Myers-Briggs, but something like the Myers-Briggs test. So it would be one of those. I mean, most likely Myers-Briggs. Okay, so that's the last of the practice questions. And what I would encourage you to do for the rest of the period is to take out the set of questions that are on the gray countertop, or if you didn't get them yesterday, and the answers are online. And I would take those, and I will be putting out a guided review sheet for multiple choice tomorrow. So you'll have that tomorrow night. And please prepare for the FRQ, which will be delivered in class tomorrow. And have a great rest of the day.